Hey, things are not what you think.
Yeah, there's always something you don't know.
Welcome to Joey's Real Talk.
老外大声说。
Okay, so today's Real Talk is about sex education. So let's set things up a little bit. Now, a number of weeks ago, one piece of national news took Taiwan by storm. Lin Yifan, a young author of a novel loosely translated as Fang Ciqi's First Love Paradise, she took her own life months after the book was published, and Lin based her sexual and mental abuse of her character on her own experiences with her much older cram school teacher at the vulnerable age of 16.
And her name is Han, not Fan.
Fan. Oh, right. Why did I write Fan? Lin Yihan. Okay. My bad. Thank you for... Okay, that's why you guys were making all those gestures.
Yes. We were trying to be polite, but
Thank you. Okay, anyway, Lin's parents have expressed that they learned about Lin's relationship, quote-unquote, with her teacher years later, but due to concern for her then college entrance and the media already praising her as a straight-A student with, limitless opportunities, they decided to keep the affair a secret and never speak of it. Now, following the inevitable media and social condemnation of her cram school teacher, which spread like a wildfire after Lin's tragic end, today on Real Talk, we want to ask the question that's been largely overlooked. What are the roles of parents in educating about sex, love, and relationship? The topic of sex is still very much a taboo in Taiwan, and some people say our educational system does not do enough to keep young people understanding these issues. So today we want to talk a little bit about that. Maybe if we would have been able to prevent the psychological decline of Lin Yihan by simply improving our attitude towards sex or intimate relationships and how we talk or don't talk about it. Okay.
Right.
Yes. So today we have, aside from Nancy and Philip, who of course is going to lend their 2 cents to us in terms of their sex ed at a younger age, we're also going to invite a lot of people. Why is Phil looking at me like that?
We're trying to look past the...
It's hard to take you seriously right now.
When I have this makeup on?
Yeah.
But this is a serious topic.
It is a serious
Okay,
topic.
sorry,
I see.
sorry.
Okay, that's why you're looking at me like that. Today we've invited our expat members of our expat communities, folks from the UK, from the US, from Taiwan here, from India even, to talk about their experiences with sex education. So let's first start with this question. We asked all of them, where did you learn about sex? And here is some of their responses.
I think like many American kids, I went to an American, elementary and middle school, and somewhere in late elementary, I remember that they do a standard sex education, couple of classes where they would typically separate the boys and girls, and they would maybe show a film or a video, and then they would have a nurse or a counselor or someone come in and talk about the basics. And this is what I always thought of as the "your body's going to change" conversation. They would put up diagrams and tell you about what's going to happen to your body over the next, 1 or 2 years. When I was about 13 or 14, we had a 1-semester health class that would talk about all sorts of health issues, including nutrition, how the body works, the different names for parts of the body and all of that. But a part of that was reproductive health. Topics like safe sex and contraception and birth control and consensual sex and some of those other terms that in the house or at home, that wasn't talked about very much, actually, even though my family was fairly open.
I first heard about sex when I was probably around 10 years old, and I didn't really question it until maybe I was like 10 or 11, and I was at school. We have sex education classes, so people come in from outside of school and teach children about sex education and what's right and what's safe way to have sex. I never really asked my parents, not that I can remember.
I remember back in the day that there was not a lot of information to be found on the internet. This is when I was, I guess, in my teens, and so that's like in the 80s. I do remember in high school going to kind of like the convenience stores and walking close to the section where there was a couple of the adult magazines that are wrapped in plastic, and just looking at the covers and just very curious. And in high school, using a very slow 2G phone and surfing for pictures online. But I do remember some classes in middle school and high school talking about public health issues. And, in biology, talking about the reproductive system. I would have to say that I definitely did not have such conversations with my parents. I kind of wish we did, but got a lot of the information from school and some of it from the internet.
Okay, so we got quite a few, stories from our interviewees today. Now, the last person I have to say, of course, from those kind of specific kind of special magazines or from, certain websites, I think that's the worst way to learn about sex.
Because it presents such an unrealistic view. It's not even reality.
Exactly.
But what breaks my heart is that so many adults, like our age and older, they say their parents didn't talk about it. And I would say we are almost, I don't know if it's fortunate, but we already have access to a lot more information through multimedia than our parents did. And so what did they do? Well, their parents obviously didn't talk about sex.
Surely.
And they had no access to realistic or unrealistic depictions of that.
Yeah, I would say, especially here in Taiwan, I'm guessing, judging from my parents' attitude, there is none of those
knowledge
conversations happening in the house before the 80s, for sure.
Yeah.
What are your, sex ed experiences from you guys? You're both from Canada?
Yes.
Okay. Philip, what was yours?
Mine mostly was just school. I mean, when I was in grade 7, I think, the grade just before high school for me, our teacher, she was very vocal and very, she wanted to try and make it as painless as possible. So she had a lot of, I think it was once a week. I don't actually remember how often, but she had regular, sex talks with us. And she also made this box where you could put in anonymous questions and stuff.
We had those too, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't separate us to male and female or whatever. We just...
Because why?
Because why? I mean, it's not something to be ashamed of, right? You need to learn about both sides of the equation.
Okay, but did you only have one sessions of these? Or?
Oh, no, this happened a couple times over the year.
Okay.
And then also in my first year of high school, there's a class that kind of cycles, like these other people will mention. It cycles through different topics, and there was maybe a week or two where we talked about sex and, how to put on a condom and, STDs and everything.
Okay. Yeah, same for me. I think sex education in Canada, at least back then, when we went to school, it started in grade 4. And so you did have to take a permission form home, and your parents had to sign it. And then you had health class, and you learned the basic stuff. I think if your teacher did it once a week, she went above and beyond.
I really don't remember. It was probably less than once a week.
Wow.
But I just remember it being actually quite a large part. She was very vocal about, how you shouldn't be ashamed about it, and, it's something that you should talk about.
It sounds like she, put in extra effort. Good for her.
Because this conversation shouldn't just happen once or twice, and there are a lot of nuances about not just sex, not just about the biological, the anatomy, but also about its relationship to, people, how you should engage in it with people who you are in a great relationship with, or otherwise. And these are things that I think parents, have more time to cover. So if parents don't talk about it, then who is going to teach the kids? Certainly, a lot of kids don't confide in their teachers enough to go and just throw them some random questions like that. So the second question we asked our interviewees is how would you want your kids to learn about sex? And let's give this one a listen right here on ICRT.
I would like that information to be imparted to my kids in school, because it's kind of embarrassing to talk about it at home in the Asian culture.
So I remember I never asked my parents, but if I was to have children, I would definitely want them to ask me about sex. If they had any questions or if they wanted to know more about it, I would really like them to ask me personally, because I want to have that open and confident conversation that they can ask me anything they want and tell me anything that they want to talk about.
I do want the school to have some responsibility for teaching and addressing it as a group and talking about sex education with their peers who are going through the experience at the same time. I also really think it's important for families and parents to talk to their kids not just one conversation where you sit down and say, well, I now think you're old enough to talk about it. In our family, it's something that we have talked about from when they were little. This is something that would come up over time. I mean, we've talked about our own bodies. We've talked about being confident. We've talked about people that we dated before we were married.
Has a lot of information, both good and bad, both fake and real. And so I think it's important more than ever for the right information, whether that is delivered via parents or teachers or textbooks, to get to the mind of the children so that they have proper understanding of sex education, public health issues, because the internet is filled with a lot of filth and a lot of bad examples.
All right, there you go. Yeah, there are a lot of ways to, of course, learn about sex, but it would be nice if there's someone to guide you alone. Now, Philip, what did you think of that little bit right there?
Well, I think, excuse me.
You're excused.
Thank you. It's important, I think, to talk about sex or at least to not be ashamed to speak about it. Because if you are always pushing the problem away, saying, oh, no, you don't need to think about that, it's not a problem for you, you're promoting the idea that sex is shameful. And I mean, certainly it's something private. You should be careful about who you speak about it with, someone that you trust. But it's not something shameful. And if you promote this idea that sex is shameful, then that's when people will start getting shamed for being sexual in whatever form they choose to manifest it in.
Have you ever met someone who just knows nothing about the subject?
Oh, yes. So in high school, we had these two international students who were the part of my core group, and one was from Japan, one was from Korea. And Korea, apparently, according to her, has no sex education. And we found this out.
Back then. How many years ago was this?
This was 10 years ago. I
Okay,
graduated 10 years ago.
so we know. Yeah.
Now. Anyways, so the reason we found out was because we were talking about it, sex between ourselves, and she had no idea what we were talking about. And so the Japanese girl had to explain to her how babies were made.
Oy.
And she was so shocked. She said, oh my God, I cannot believe that my mother did that. That is so disgusting. I thought that you prayed to God and he made you pregnant. And we were like, okay, Junie.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Dear.
Yes.
Of course, there are other stories like the storks, bringing in the kids to the households.
Right.
They even made a movie about that, which I'm not sure if it's going to further this, illusion, bring the illusion of, how sex is done or how babies
are brought
from.
by birds.
I remember when I was a kid, my parents, and I think this is a very popular sex ed book in Taiwan, my parents gave me a book that described sex as your mom tickling your dad's nose with a feather.
What on earth?
And then when he finally sneezed, 9 months later, babies are born.
Wait. So she tickles him for 9 months? No, she tickles him, he sneezes, and then 9 months later.
And then 9 months later, the baby's born. Yeah, which is, I wonder how... So when I moved to Canada and had my first sex ed classes, you can imagine the trauma. It's kind of like, what do you mean that's what happened? And I think a lot of Asian kids of my age might have gone through that. Or even, that's older, might have gone through that revelation.
And then, that just perverts the idea of tickling. Like, what if your friend starts tickling you at your birthday or something?
No,
you're like,
I'm gonna have a baby next year. Stop doing that, right? Okay, so we have asked this quite a few kids. I don't want to say kids, but like younger listeners of ICRT, whether or not they're having sex ed in their classes or at their schools. And we're gonna play that in just a little bit after we take a short break. Today, our conversation is about Taiwan's sex education. If you have anything to contribute, please do share that with us in the Facebook Live comment section. And also today, the question for most of you is, what sort of ridiculous allegories for sex have you heard from your parents? We'd like to hear those stories as well. All right, we'll be right back here on Real Talk.
We're ICRT, and it's time for a few important messages.
Learn about another voice and culture of Taiwan with We Love How.
Teaching everybody about sexual, your body and consent and all that stuff, instead of just having to teach women to be scared of men.
现在是有声音的了，有声音吧，可以 check 一下。
Alright，我们刚刚谈了很多，然后有谈到说外国朋友们他们在小时候的时候是接受什么样的这个性教育哦。那么其实通常是从10岁左右开始，在美国或加拿大至少就会有第一堂性教育课，然后一开始是当然就是教你要经历青春期的那段时间，身体会有什么样的变化。然后大概在13、14岁，在初中、高中的时候，就会有一些在教说哦，如果说真的有性行为的话，要怎么样保护自己。然后 STD， 如果说有传染病或者性病的话，就是要怎么样去面对之类的问题。那其实这种课通常会有2、3堂，哎。性教育是跟家庭教育、健康教育一起教嘛？
对，跟 health class 一起，而且通常就是1年只有最多可能1、2个礼拜而已啦。
Yeah, okay, not very long.
Not very long.
然后其实我有听说啦，我不确定，因为我大学或者我国中、高中、大学不在台湾读的，但是听说有时候台湾的国中、高中性教育，有时候老师就是给你们读一些东西，然后他也不会去谈。那我不知道这是真的还是假的，所以你们大家可以分享一下，你们小时候所受的性教育是哪里来的？那再来就是，请问家长有没有跟你们讲过一些很荒谬的故事？比如说，就像我刚刚讲到，我小时候读一本书，他讲说，性就是妈妈拿一个羽毛去烧爸爸的鼻子，然后最后打喷嚏，然后打出来之后，过了9个月他就有一个小孩了。So it's a really interesting story. Definitely not true. And
very strange.
Yeah, so I come from my dad's sneeze, basically.
There are people who are into that, I guess. I don't know. Sneezing or tickling.
People are into everything.
Yes, you're right.
像国外有送子鸟的观念，有这种传说。台湾有类似的传说吗？女娲会捏那个泥娃娃，但是它并不是
石头里蹦出来的。
石头里蹦。
是这个孙悟空啊？
孙悟空？
是孙悟空还是桃太郎？
好像是桃子里蹦出来。
很多蹦出来的。
The monkey?
Oh, the monkey
jumped out of a monkey king.
I don't know the story.
He apparently was born out of a rock.
He has a stick that grows.
Yes. Makes you wonder. Yeah, what they're about. OK， 所以希望大家可以帮我们多分享今天的 Facebook Live。我们还有第2段有专访一些年轻朋友，他们现在在国中或者是高中或大学有没有接受到性教育，然后小学的时候有没有上这样子类似的课程。那么等一下可以帮我们多分享一下今天的这个 Facebook Live。Share our Facebook Live today about sex education. It's important. You gotta have it. If your parents, especially if your parents aren't talking to you about it. And I know this is very distracting, but I have a faux makeup on today because this is what I do every day. 然后今天礼拜5，所以我决定要上一下浓妆，跟大家打个招呼。然后同时跟你们讲说，今天 Katy Perry 出了新专辑了，他也是这样类似的。你们等一下上我们的 Instagram 知道了。
No.
Oh yes, it's a lot of you look like the transsexual.
The doctor, right?
Yeah, what's Dr. Frankenfurter? That's the one. What's this?
That's
don't touch it! Don't
touch it! It was in his mouth.
Oh, nasty.
Ew.
I mean, it's probably not any dirtier than like a bus.
Pestilence.
Well, yeah.
So this is what I did. Katy Perry 的新专辑这样子。
Ew.
Swish, swish, bish.
Another one in the basket. All right, anyway, back to Real Talk Joe. I'm sure it's been to worse
Did
places.
somebody disinfect that?
Actually, 他那个是摸彩箱里面拿出来的。
Oh, you!
所以表示很多人手有生命性而已。I shouldn't have put that in my mouth. My goodness. All right, welcome back to Real Talk here on the Midday Show. Today's subject of matter is sex education in Taiwan and maybe the sufficiency or insufficiency of it. And of course, we have Nancy and Philip here. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
We also have somebody on Facebook Live, Ting Wen-xue,
Okay.
who says, "My mom think every man can be dangerous. It's such a common idea that gets drilled into women's and girls' brains.
We do have to address that.
Dangerous. And when men want something, they could say anything to you, but they don't necessarily mean it, or they think they mean it at the time, but they don't actually mean it. We do have to address
that. Okay, well, there obviously are, sexual deviants or predators out there, but it seems to be such a, skewed view. So what are your guys' thoughts when you hear something like this?
Well, I think Philip mentioned earlier that there's so much of a focus on telling a woman or telling a girl you need to protect yourself. These are the defensive measures you can take. You need to do blah, blah, blah. And then when you
but
get
it would
to
be easier if you just instructed everybody, especially the men, to respect.
Right, when you get to the men's side of it, or the boys' side of the education,
boys will be boys, they say, right?
Right, because if you tell your girls to just stay away from men altogether, most of them have to get married one day. They have to approach.
It goes down to, blaming the victim, right?
Right.
What was she doing? What was she wearing? How was she walking? That's why she got, attacked, assaulted. But really, no, it's just down to man.
Should be the respect should be coming from that side. Right? But I also argue that interacting with their male counterparts so that they know
to know what is the norm and what is normal and what is acceptable, and then when something unacceptable happens or something not normal happens, then they know because they've had experience.
So when you see a sexual deviant, you know how to identify them, I guess,
or the behavior,
the behavior of it.
Right.
Okay, so the question we asked some of our younger listeners is basically, what are these kids? What are you learning about? How are you learning about sex, or are you learning about sex in school these days? And here are some of their answers.
During my freshman year of high school, we had this semester of health class. It was only required that we need to take it for one semester. And so we basically talked about the nutrients of food. We also talked about puberty. We talked about sex. We talked about safe sex. We also talked a bit about the human body. I was 14.
So in my school, they switched topics every semester for health class, and then only one of the semesters was about sex ed. So it's when you're 4th grade, they taught the whole semester about that, from to know which gender you are, and then to learn about different parts or organs, and then learn to respect each gender, and then to how to protect yourself.
Okay, so I was kind of, I guess, not surprised, but the second interviewee said that, it happened once in elementary school, and I'm not sure if they still take it through high school, but certainly I think that is the case for some of them. Nancy, what do you think?
But I feel a lot of, it does seem like education and sex education is more comprehensive than when our generation went to school. But I feel there's still such a huge part of it lacking, and one of the major topics they should be talking about is consent, right? What is consent? What does it look like? What does it sound like? How can it be given? How can it not be given? And also for young children, you can start at a really young age and you can teach them that they have the right to their own bodies. A lot of parents will, if they meet with their friends, they'll say, oh, why don't you go kiss that person, or why don't you go give that person a hug, and all of that. And then even if the child is not willing, we kind of force them to, and then that teaches them they don't have the right to decide who touches their body or who they touch or what they want to do with their own bodies. And I feel that's so important. They should have the right to decide.
True.
So I think that's something that can be taught in sex education, these two main areas.
Yes. There's an example of that from my family even. My mother told me this story because I was not alive at that time, but my grandfather came to visit, and my sister was very young, so she must have been only about 3 years old. And when he got out of the car, he knelt down and put his arms open and said, come give your grandfather a hug. And my sister ran behind my mother. And she didn't want to hug him. And he's like, you have to hug me. I am your grandfather. So my mom looked at him. She said, she doesn't have to do anything she doesn't want to.
Right. And it's not, it's not an attack on your grandfather. He's probably just saying it as a joke. I don't know. But yeah, you can tell kids they can decide what they want to do with their own bodies.
Yes.
That's such a key issue. Imagine what would happen if maybe perhaps this author that we mentioned earlier knew that, or had that kind of upbringing, and I'm assuming things about her parents. I don't know for sure, but it could make a difference for some people.
Okay, so how about let's continue that conversation with our younger interviewees about whether or not their parents are talking to them about sex. Let's give this one a listen.
I've tried to talk about this with my parents, like, oh, the school taught us this today, and then my parents were like, oh, like, no, they don't want to talk about that with me. I think my parents need to talk more about that to me.
We only talked about it like once. I was around 12 or 13, and we talked about everything, but it was just like one time. Well, I think my parents and the teachers, they covered all the basics, but it's kind of awkward if you just go up and ask about things. Yeah.
Mom and Dad have never really talked to me about any of this stuff, but never really had any curiosity for this topic because in my culture it's kind of taboo.
Okay, so that last one I think is a bit alarming, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't get to hear about it, and they know that it's taboo, and they just accept it that you can't talk about it.
And they say they have no interest in it, but is that going to last forever?
True. Yeah.
If you really haven't had any interest in it, are you never going to have interest in it? And my issue with this is just that parents will say, maybe some parents fear, like, if I start this conversation with my child, maybe they never thought about it before, like this person said, but after I have this conversation, then they're going to be like, oh my God, we can go have sex,
Okay, yes,
and that
I see what you
fear,
mean.
and statistically,
Open the floodgates.
Exactly, and statistically, like, it's going to happen in some way, shape, or form, whatever it is, even thinking about it. And then for you to say, like, if I don't talk about it, maybe it won't happen. That's kind of...
It's like if your kid is going to drive a car, you probably hope they have a license first.
Right, exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
True, yes.
We have a Facebook comment. Oh no, this is the word that I don't know how to read.
Let me see. Pass it over.
You read it. Sorry.
All right. Facebook comment from Wu Shuozhe, right?
you.
This is the one you're talking about. Okay. Who says, if I have children, I will tell them you can be curious, but you can't cross the line.
What does that mean, cross the line?
That is still hard to define, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
the line
what
is
the
blurred.
line, and where is the line? Who decides?
I guess what he means is let the kids know that mom and dad want you to tread carefully when
there
you
are
approach
dangers.
this subject. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. But see, that's another issue that I have. I feel like especially personally for my own upbringing, it was like, there's no such thing as sex. There's no such thing as sex. No sex, no sex, no sex. And that went on until, 20s, mid-20s. And then once I got to about 25, 26, 27, then they started saying, get married. Now's the time to get married. Why aren't you getting married? Why aren't you having kids? It's like there's no in between
Black and white,
for
very
like
much.
having no relations to all of a sudden being married. And then there is, like relationships and dating and, having a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever. There is an in between, but then the current atmosphere, the current attitude from parents is you jump from no sex, it doesn't exist, to now you're getting married and having sex and
The current
having
attitude
babies.
where? I would say this needs a qualification.
In my house.
Okay.
And maybe possibly in some other people's houses. I don't know.
I agree. For example, a young teenage girl, comes home to mom and has a lot of questions she wants to ask, like, my boyfriends want certain things. Should I? How should I respond? These are questions that a mom could really help out with. And if she can't talk to you, mommy, then she's going to talk to her peers. Her peers will probably have ridiculous answers to these kind of questions. That's not what you want them to listen to.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so the last question we asked our interviewees is, can you compare your experience of, talking about sex, seriously or jokingly with people in Taiwan versus people from your country of origin? Let's hear what they said.
I feel like it is a lot more conservative, and I also feel like it is a lot more secretive and hidden. I think that, teenagers are teenagers, and they're still hooking up, and they're still partying too hard, and they're still not wanting their parents to find out parts of their behavior. But I think that all of that is done very secretively, and that there's a lot of pressure not to be revealed as somebody who's sexually promiscuous or sexually active, to a point that it embarrasses the family or shames the family. And so it's not just the child worrying how will they be viewed individually, it's what will my family think of this also, and how will this impact their reputation and my relationship with them.
talking about sex from people in England and people here is very different. I don't have the confidence to ask Taiwanese people or talk to my Taiwanese friends about sex. I feel like they never approach the subject, or there's never any light humor about talking about sex or your sexual relationships. So I don't overstep that mark. Whereas friends in England, I feel like we're just more open to talk about it or your experiences about it. There's a definite big difference between Taiwan and England. It's definitely a taboo subject.
Talking about sex with people in Taiwan is becoming a lot more straightforward. It has progressed quite a bit over the years. I don't necessarily feel like there is a big difference in terms of the way people talk about sex in Taiwan versus overseas. With the exception that perhaps Taiwanese still tend to be a little bit shyer about sharing a lot of the details. Whereas a lot of my friends overseas, they feel that it's not as much of a taboo to share the details, of certain sexual encounters. I would say that is the biggest difference.
Yeah, that last one, I think there's a certain thing called TMI, too much information. And sometimes even your closest friends don't want to hear about certain encounters.
My friends and I actually don't talk about sex.
Oh, really?
I mean, we'll make jokes about it, and that's okay. That's kosher. But we don't, talk about private details, blow by blows.
Whoa, that is a very specific word, Nancy.
That is not a sex specific word. Okay. Anyway.
Philip, have you ever had...
Are you guys blushing right now?
I am. I think I am. I feel a little warm right now.
Have you guys ever had sex explained to you in a weird way?
You mean like with nose tickling?
Something like along that line. No? So you guys had pretty...
I mean, there's that, what is it? The stereotypical birds and the bees, but I've actually never even heard that
Why did we say
conversation.
birds and bees?
I really don't know.
It could be because birds are meant to pollinate... some birds and most bees are meant to pollinate.
Birds too, yeah.
But what does that have to do with birds then?
Reproduction.
I have no idea.
Apparently, we need someone to explain the birds and bees to us.
I suppose, yes. And if you know anything about the origin of that phrase, please let us know in the Facebook Live comment section. And today's topic, of course, is to get people thinking about sex, thinking about maybe there is a better way to help your kids learn about sex. Anything else you want to share, please do continue to leave more comments in our Facebook Live little comment section. And today's Real Talk, we had Nancy and Philip joining us.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you all for joining us in the chats. We'll come back next week, Friday, same time, same place at 3 p.m. And of course, to wrap up this little segment, let's play this one right here. Salt and Pepper. Let's talk about sex.
Cut it up one time.
Hello, handsome and gorgeous. Thank you for watching our video. If you like more general shenanigans or artist interviews, please make sure you click to the next video, but also make sure you subscribe to us by pressing the bell button down here, because we like to tell you more about fun stuff coming up.